singer by the name of Johnny Carroll, a rockabilly singer of that era. And he had a gig at the Texas Theater. This would be late 1956. And our group, of course, backed him on stage at the Texas Theater. It was backstage that Jack Ruby showed up, along with a guy by the name of J.G. Tiger, a good buddy of his. And the two of them were very interested in us as a group joining AGVA, if you could believe. That's the American Guild of Variety Artists, and doing some shows with them. And so, make a long story short, Jack Ruby took our name, and then he also invited us to, after the show, to go to an AGVA meeting, which was over in another section of Dallas at Ed McLemore Auditorium. And we sang a little bit for that little gathering. In the meantime, I also had made several trips and continued to do so, and up through about 1962, made trips to Dallas to see the shows, Jack Ruby's, the Colony Club, and the Theater Lounge. They were within a block of each other. And they staggered their shows so that we could actually go over there and spend 3 hours and catch 3 shows. And that was a fun time for us guys from the little small town of Cleveland. So that's how I became acquainted with him. I also, during that time, heard the scuttlebutt that be careful with Jack Ruby, he's mafia. And so you can see my interest when I saw Jack Ruby kill Lee Harvey Oswald. Something really stunk. And that was how I got started in this whole thing.
What do you mean by the stench? It's just like something isn't right in the sense.
Oh yeah, when the cops allowed Jack Ruby to shoot Oswald, I thought at the time that it was silencing him. They didn't want his story to come out. I have learned later that the reason they silenced him is because they didn't have any evidence against him. In reality, that what they had, probably most of it would be thrown out of court, and a lot of it was concocted, especially his story. And the evidence is just no good. How can you bring a guy to trial? That would open up a new can of worms. So that's the reason they silenced him, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a very good, I wouldn't disagree with that, in all honesty. I mean, at first I would think the same thing what you thought at first, but by going through the evidence myself and the interrogations as such, I'm basically just come to the conclusion that they had nothing on him, and they had to coax the whole lineup witnesses as such, which is a terrible travesty of justice. I think Ian Griggs already wrote about that years ago, and so did Jill Jesus as well, and a few others. And I had to go through the lineups myself, and I was just like, and I didn't want to do it, but I had to do it because it was part of his interrogations and so forth. So, and it just, the whole thing just stank to high heaven there and then. But there are several instances where it absolutely stinks to high heaven. So you see the assassination, and you know about Ruby killing Oswald. What happens next? Are you right away involved, or we have to wait a year or two before you finally said, "Oh, I'm going to investigate this"? As such?
Well, I immediately started reading everything I could find. At that time, I took a couple of local newspapers, actually 3, the Cleveland one, and also the Dallas Morning News and the Fort Worth Star Telegram. Right. And so I clipped and followed all of the activities surrounding that in those stories, and in Life magazine and Newsweek and so forth. And so I began to collect that and read it. And about they immediately printed nationwide copies, or well, worldwide, really. Associated Press and United Press International printed the Warren Report. And that came out shortly after September of 1964. I got a copy real quick and read it. immediately. And for a short while, very short while, I thought, well, maybe they had something. But the more I read, and then a book came out that probably all of you have read, and it made an impact on you. Mark Lane's book, Rush to Judgment, came out. I read that, and I was in the ball game. It wasn't long after that they did a book review in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram of Penn Jones's second volume of Forgive My Grief. And I had not heard of Penn Jones Jr., but he was 20 miles away in Midlothian. And I got in my car and went and introduced myself. We became fast friends. I bought everything that he had. I bought Sylvia Meyer's book from him. I bought, he had purchased several copies of the Warren Commission 26 volumes, as well as the report. So I ended up buying 2 of those from him, one for my office at the time and one for home. So I always be real close. And that's how I got started. Penn and I began to run around and talk to witnesses and make little presentations. I carried his projector when he made talks. If he went to the Lions Club or some civic-minded club and made a little speech, well, I was his assistant. And so that's my start in all of this. I decided in about 1967 or 68 to write. And that's how I got started. We began to write Cover Up in about 1968. And we finally self-published it. I couldn't get a publisher in 1976. So if you're going to write a book, you better put about 3 times the time limit you think you could do it in. One of the funny things is that I told Penn I was going to write that, and he had just a few copies of a little leather-covered Forgive My Grief Volume 1. And so he gave me one, and he wrote in it, he said, "Gary, write the book. You'll make no money, but you'll sleep better." And that is the honest truth. And that's how it turned out for me. That's the beginnings.
Gary, hi there.
Hi.
Just a quick question. When did you meet Larry Harris, and what was he like as a person?
Well, when I began to talk about writing a book, I passed the word around to Mary Farrell, to Penn, and to others involved in this, that I needed a good young writer. I was an architect. I'm not a writer. I've never had a writing lesson in my life. And so Larry Harris came along about that time, and we got together. And to me, he was a great writer. And we would get to my office early in the morning, and we'd go over what he's going to write that day. I had already outlined and had in mind exactly where I was going with it, and had done the research on it. And we'd sit and discuss it in the mornings. The next morning, he'd come in and bring what he had written. We would go over that and talk about what he was going to write that day. And it was just, that's the way it progressed. Then after we finished that, we had it typeset, and I physically put the book together and had it printed, since I couldn't get a publisher.
From a timing perspective, it's kind of interesting because it was released during the HSCA. Was this...
Actually, it was released before the HSCA by a year.
Just before 76.
But there was a real interest, mainly because of Bob Broden's bravery in showing the Zapruder film on national TV in 1975.
Yeah, and then you get that whole debate about...
That's right. And so it was all heating up about that time. And so it would have been a good time if I could have got a national publisher. I think it would have been a very popular book.
Yeah.
Was there anything suspicious about Larry's death?
I wish I could tell you that I had investigated that. I haven't. It's way up a long ways from Cleveland, Texas to Ohio, where he was killed. My understanding is that he ran either into the rear of a large 18-wheeler or a large truck, or head on. I'm not sure which. Is there anything suspicious about it? At that time, he and I were far apart geographically, and we communicated only occasionally. And so I really don't know what he was working on. If he were working on something that was important to the people who want to keep the lid on this thing, it would not be surprising to me.
He was very good on Tippet, wasn't he?
Yes.
Which was a dangerous area, wasn't it?
Probably so. And yeah,
with a high mortality rate.
To show how gung-ho he was, you may not know this, and you may. During that early period, he got a job with the post office department so he could deliver mail in the Oak Cliff section of town. And so we learned a lot.
Yeah, he worked with Ken Holmes, didn't he, as well?
Yes, worked with Ken. Yeah. Unfortunately, Ken's dead.
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I can see that, Scott, you got your hand raised. Do you want to come in with a question?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Hi, Gary. I've met you a few times at Chris Gall.
I recognize your face. Good to see you.
So it's good to see you again. I just wondered if you had met Roger Craig, and if you have met Roger Craig, if you've got any recollections and stuff.
I met Roger Craig right after he had gone to Jim Garrison's the trial of Clay Shaw down in New Orleans. Penn brought him over to my office. Penn had actually there'd been a threat on Roger's life, and Garrison had called Penn and said this guy needs some help, so he brought him over to my office. I interviewed him and recorded him about that time. In fact, I tell his story pretty completely in Cover Up because of my interview with him. And great guy, tall, thin, nice looking, and personable and honest. That's how I would describe him. I think he would have been a great policeman, and had he lived so long to stay in that line of work. But they crucified him, and whether you believe he committed suicide or whether you believe someone killed him, really doesn't matter. They had already ruined him and killed him by reputation.
Can we put this back to the sheriff's department itself?
Well, naturally, if you go against Sheriff Decker, you're not going to be popular. Up until that time, he was Decker's boy. I mean, he was an up-and-coming deputy. But after Garrison and after he wouldn't shut up, of course, they dismissed him.
I mean, I believe Craig as well, especially with the sequence that's in your book, Tony, that's on pages 33, 4, and 5, about the Roger Craig and the Nash Rambler as such. I put a lot of weight on the confrontation inside room 317, where Craig came into Fritz's office and pointed Oswald out to him and so forth. Fritz does his best during the Warren Commission to basically claim that, oh yeah, I don't know, maybe, yeah, we talked to him in the outer office, this, that, and that kind of lingo. Whereas what a lot of people don't know is that the front page of the Dallas Times Herald the next day, the morning edition, has got like the top half is devoted to Roger Craig and the Nash Rambler situation, and the fact that he confronted him in the interrogation room of Will Fritz inside 317. that the speed of that segment, basically. And on top of that, there's a report by James Bookhout, who states clearly in his report that at 5:17 in the afternoon that Roger Craig walked in. So really on the minute, basically, just looked at his watch and basically makes a report of that Roger Craig walked inside that office as such. But
I think at last count, we had about 4 supporting testimonies of people who said that they saw the same thing, basically, and that Roger Craig saw. So one of them, a guy named Robinson, I interviewed because I found a document where he was supposed to appear before the Warren Commission and give testimony about what he saw. He was to follow Roger Craig. He couldn't do so at that time, and they never called him again. On his letter, or on his invitation to appear before them, it's got in big red letters KP. Some of you may not know what that means. It means key person. So Mr. Robinson was a key person because he saw what Roger Craig saw. And then they buried that. I didn't find that out for years after cover-up.
Gary, do you know what was planned for Oswald had he made it to the county jail on that Sunday? Do you know what was what kind of itinerary he had? I've heard that there was supposed to be a press conference scheduled where people could ask questions.
I don't recall exactly what would have taken place. Normally, you when you're indicted or you're charged, you go from the local authorities to the county authorities, and you're held over for trial. And probably Decker may have had a plan to have a press conference and maybe say some more things. Whether he would have let Roger Craig say anything or not, that remains to be seen. You know, I wish it had happened. And
do you think Lee could have been tried in Dallas?
I don't know that. Probably, you know, trials here in Texas, you know, they can move them. In fact, you know, Jack Ruby's trial, he got a new trial order, and they were taking him to Wichita Falls, Texas, which is 150 miles from Dallas, to have his new trial. And they were about to transfer him there when they found out he had galloping cancer and suddenly died of a thrombosis.
Yeah, I have heard that. I know there's a document that states, I think there's J. Edgar Hoover says it is like at the present time the case we have against Oswald isn't very strong. Isn't very strong at all. We haven't got any evidence to get a conviction.
That's an understatement.
Yeah.
They had no case at all.
So I've co-authored a book. It's coming out very soon, and it kind of goes through all the key evidence in the case, and I try and outline why there is no such thing as like chain of possession of the evidence, etc. I don't believe there would have been any case. There could have been any case brought against them because there is no evidence to convict them.
That's my opinion. It sure is. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason he had to die. They couldn't. If he was not guilty, they had to go look for the guilty, and they certainly didn't want to do that.
See,
besides Roger Craig, did you you spoke also to Richard Carr? Yes. And also Gerald Hemming?
Yes.
So first of all, Gerald Hemming, which is a bit of step outside the Dallas pond you've been fishing in regarding research for your book.
Right.
What led you to basically seek him out and talk to him?
Well, I was working, of course, with the what was then the CTIA, the Committee to Investigate Assassinations. I later came on board with that, and later we converted it to the AARC. I was the secretary when that became a nonprofit and became the AARC. Bud Finsterwald and that group had a large file on Hall and Hemming and these guys. And I became very interested in Hemming because actually I thought Hemming was seen on Elm Street just before the assassination, carrying a rifle. And I later learned that that was not so, but that was kind of my interest in him. I didn't talk that much to Hemming in those early days. Later, I got to meet him personally. And, you know, a very, very, believe it or not, a very, very cordial and easygoing and you know, nice to know.
Right. And then you got Richard Carr, which is quite interesting as well. Of course, he saw something he wasn't meant to see, and most people try to get rid of as such from a testimonial point of view.
I interviewed him and recorded his interview, still have it. Probably one of these days I need to transcribe all the interviews I did or make them available, but you know, that's difficult to do. I have such a huge collection of files and that sort of thing, photographs. I've been putting some of the stuff, especially the photographs and slides, on a website called JFK CSI Dallas or something like that. And you can click on a link that they put up there. And there's some great photographs. I mean, some second generation stuff that people haven't seen. And go in there and look at it.
Yeah, the Willis slides are there, and you know, there's quite a few Dealey Plaza pictures, aftermath photographs in black and white and in color.
I talked to Wilma Bond, and she's actually sent me copies directly from her original slides, and that was early on, and I printed some of those. The S.L. Reed slides are on there. They're interesting, and
yeah.
I don't remember all that's on there, but visit the site because I'll be putting some of the early stuff on. For instance, I think there'll be a real interest in Jean-René Swetre, the Frenchman who was in Dallas on the day of the morning of the assassination and was flown out by orders of someone in Washington. That's the story anyway. I think there'll be a lot more coming out shortly about him. I wrote about him in 1977, you know, and how long ago is that? I wrote 2 or 3 articles back in 77 and 78. I need to put them on there just to show that, hey, we're trying to do the work that the authorities failed or refused to do.
What was the goal with the book, actually, in comparisons to, you know, you've got whitewash, accessories after the fact, and so on from the late 60s and early 70s, and then you're, excuse me, coming up with the book. What was the goal, actually, as such?
Well, my goal, and I state that I think in the preface of the book, that my goal was to write a book that anybody could pick up and read and get a good understanding of the problems with the Warren Commission's conclusions about Lee Harvey Oswald. You can, you know, the average person won't pick up a Sylvia Meyer book, and it's a great book.
Yeah, it's one of the best.
But it's so detailed that, you know, they quickly, you know, I can't understand this, or this is too complicated for me, or something like that. I wanted to put something down in simple form. That's the way my architectural practice was. My architectural practice was based on the KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And that was to design a building and draw the working drawings prepare the working drawings in a manner that easily can be read and put together. And
right.
That's what I wanted to do with the book.
With the book, you know, I don't know how much time you spend on the documentation that's been coming out since the release of the book and so forth. Is there anything that you found out afterwards that was most surprising with regards to what you wrote down and what you find out 10, 20, 30, 40 years later as such? And you go.
I'll say this. Yes, I have continued to follow it, but that's an awful lot of documents. And pouring through those is going to be a lifetime work. My lifetime is not too long now. And so I'm concentrating really on helping other writers and people with their research. I may publish again. I've written a number of things, and because there are new revelations that are in the documents that they hid for years, and understandably so, if you want to fool the American people and concoct a story that you want to pass off as truth. There's no truth to what they did to Oswald.
Gary,
were you ever asked to back off?
Did you ever fear for your personal safety, or were you ever intimidated when you were researching this case in the 60s and 70s?
I'm naive about that kind of thing. And I had my office broken into twice during the House Select Committee. And just to give you a little quickie, the same week that they broke into the safe at the House Select Committee, they broke into my office. Now, I don't know that this is true, but I had sent them my interview with a man by the name of Dr. Alderson, who told me about Swetra and his relationship to Swetra and how the FBI had surveilled him for a few days and finally confronted him about the whole John Swetra affair because they were buddies back in France in the mid-50s. I interviewed him and sent the transcript of that interview and also let the committee hear the recording of that interview. Very revealing about how the FBI, basically they told Alderson that Swetra either killed Kennedy or knew who did. And that people from Washington, these are FBI men, people from Washington had flown him, had him ordered him flown out of Dallas the same day. So I don't know whether they were looking for that or just what, but you'll notice there's no mention of Swetra in their House Select Committee volumes or report, which is very strange to me because they had it very early on.
Sorry, I've just got a question quickly. Sorry, Johnny. Bart, this is great. We've got an awful lot of questions coming through. Can I just check with you, Bart? Do you want to take these questions at the end of your interview?
No, if they want to ask them now, I'll let them ask them now.
That's fine. Okay, yeah. So I just want to thanks. Go ahead, Johnny. Sorry about that.
No, I was just going to ask Gary if any of the witnesses he had interviewed, if they felt intimidated or they didn't really want to speak about certain things.
Well, yeah, Beverly Oliver was very intimidated, not only by the fear of the authorities, but fear of she had married into the mafia. And she was very fearful because they told her to shut up, not talk about it. There were, our dear friend Hill, Miss Hill, was intimidated. Wilma Tice was intimidated, fakes and all of that stuff. And we initiated a real lawsuit and a liable claim against the American Medical Association, the Journal of the American Medical Association, the Dallas Morning News, David Bellin. We named about, at least a half a dozen people in the lawsuit. In fact, when I first gave my first deposition, our one attorney, Brad Kazaya, was facing about a dozen attorneys from the opposing side. And I don't mind telling you, that takes a lot out of you. Don't ever get in a lawsuit unless you just have to, because it's a pain. You know, it's something all the time. And I was really burnt out after that. We settled. We did well as we could against that powerful an entity, and we settled for a little less than $250,000 and got write a letter of which they would not approve, either in the Dallas Morning News or the JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. The Dallas Morning News will never let us, and the JAMA had to because of the settlement. And so that's the reason I didn't quit reading. I didn't go into the documents that much during that time. But later, when they started releasing the documents, I really became quite interested again. And the AARB thing was a real positive thing after JFK. And so I didn't totally quit. I just wasn't as active during that time. But it was primarily burnout and economics.
Legitimate to me. With regards to the ARB and etc., the research, in what direction have you been researching then since?
I'm looking at everything Ruby.
Okay, that's quite a big thing.
It's a big thing, and as much as I can find on Ruby, that's my history. It seems like I was thrown together with Beverly Oliver. You know, I didn't go looking for her. In fact, I'd only learned in June of that year. I met her in about September, I guess, of 1969. It was only in June of 1969 that I even knew of the Babushka lady. And that was because Richard Sprague, the original Richard Sprague, had written a long article detailing the photographic evidence and printed it in a little small magazine called Computers and Automation. And that's my first experience with, and for me to run head on into her a few months later was quite a providence, I guess you would call it. But, I don't call it a coincidence. And so I wrote her story. The story I wrote about her, of course, I didn't identify her. I wrote in the Midlothian Mirror, Penn's newspaper. Yeah. And then it appeared, of course, in his Forgive My Grief, Volume 4, I think, as a part of that book. And so, you know, that's just one of those quirky things that happened. And so my dealings and knowledge, because of my experience, both in knowing Jack Ruby, meeting Jack Ruby, going to his club, catching the acts. I had caught Beverly's act previously and didn't realize that until later. She was not a stripper. She was a singer, but she wore a real short dress. And so she was a beauty. And my connections with Shari Angel and other of those kind, I really pursued the Little Lynn escapade, and have written about it quite a bit. And the Rose Jeremy, I was the one that got Michael Marcades to come aboard and hunt out and tell his mother's story. And
that's a very good story, actually. I read the book. It's
better than even you know, probably. And there'll be more about that. She was a very, very important and valued informant for people.
Yeah. just regards your participation with JFK as such, were you involved in the man who killed Kennedy as well?
Yes, early on, and let's see, I think I'm in the first two,
right.
But I assisted Nigel Turner in research and locating people and so forth for the making of 1 and 2, I know. And probably in a couple of other areas, I helped him. He always came to see me when he got into this country working on those. And a great guy, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know how many of you were privileged to meet him, but he was a great guy and did a great work, I think. And should be still on television, but it's not.
No.
Fortunately, you can get it, I think, all on YouTube now or something. You can find it at least. He also had one in the can that would have been dynamite, and it probably will never see the light of day.
Pity. What's your connection with Marina Oswald? I mean, I've always spoken with Marina Oswald, and and you're probably aware that I investigate Prayer Man and being Oswald and all that. And she said we basically sent her some enlargement of some photographs, which were stills from the Darnell and the Wiegman films. And she just volunteered with us asking it. She says, it's Lee. And the funny part was that my pal Ed Ledoux called her and left a message. And he didn't expect a phone call back. But instead, 20 minutes later, after getting some fresh air in the house, because she was fumigating the house, she said, and she called back and he was completely surprised, so he couldn't record the call. And we basically called back and say, will you please confirm what you said so we can record this? And we have this. And she did without any hesitation whatsoever. But she also said, you need to talk to Gary Shaw because he knows about all the legality issues and Prayer Man, this, that, and the other, because we asked her, surely we're not the first ones who point this photograph to you and tell you about this as such, because this is something that's been going on close to 10 years. It's already been made mention of and so forth. What do you know about this?
Well, she and I became good friends. I even got to talk to Marguerite a few times. I met both of his girls, sweet, good looking, nice girls, Rachel and June. And actually, we were working with her and the girls at one time, Bud Finsterwald and myself, on litigation on behalf of the family for false accusations. And we were looking for avenues in which to get that in the courtroom, where we could also get witnesses in the courtroom under oath and prove and call in the evidence that they used to quote unquote convict Oswald and expose it for what it was and as false. And fortunately, that never came to pass. Eventually, Bud passed also, and really threw a kink into a lot of our doings. Actually, when Bud died, and I haven't told many people about this, but I'll tell you guys, he and I were writing a book together about the CIA and assassinations worldwide. And I don't know whether you know Bud's background or not, but he was one of the guys that was pretty well in the know in Washington, and he represented McCord in the Watergate thing. He represented James Earl Ray at one time. He was in a position to know a lot. I myself, he hadn't confided all of it in me, but I knew that the book would be dynamite. And he died. He was at my home for a week, flew to working on it, and he flew back to Washington, and bang, he's dead. So I classify him as a strange death because it's strange to me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely.
Gary,
sorry, go for it.
Yeah, Gary. Hi. You put that forward in. It was just mentioned the Dr. McCady's book on his mother Rose. A lot of people have stated that Oswald knew Ruby and Rose gave that same statement to Fruge. Do you have any other information on that, that Ruby and Oswald knew each other before the assassination?
Absolutely, and more so now after the release of documents. There's numerous, too many for me to even begin to talk about, who knew of Oswald's presence and association with Ruby prior to the assassination. There is absolutely no doubt that there was a man named Lee Oswald that was working with Jack Ruby. None.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I'm trying to really nail down. And because John Armstrong did a great job on some of the Lee Oswald, double Oswald, and so forth. But it can be carried further.
So it was the Oswald that Ruby wiped out, that they knew each other, yeah? It
was an Oswald. That's all we can say. It was an Oswald that had to be wiped out. Now, whether it was the Oswald that was in and out of the club and associating with Jack Ruby, I really don't know.
Right.
To this date. But I can assure you that someone using the name Lee Harvey Oswald or Lee Oswald was in and out of the club and well acquainted with Jack Ruby.
I'd like to ask you about the social settings, social demographic settings. Okay, so here we are in England, and we had our bit of colonialism and all other European countries and so forth, and misbehaved in other countries and so forth when it comes to race. For some strange reason in the JFK assassination, the race issue is pretty much ignored or non-existent as such. Whereas, say, for instance, the Black employees of the Texas School Book Depository clearly show traces of intimidation and especially not to divulge too much and so forth. What was your experience in those times? Because I know that, for instance, the Jim Crow laws were only by that time just about wiped off the table around that time in '63. Obviously, the law may have been swept off the table, but mentality and attitude probably be pretty much the same as such.
Well, you'd have to live in the 60s to really know, in the 50s and the 60s to really know what was going on with the race issue. There was no race issue as such. We existed side by side. For instance, in Cleburne, we had a major railroad shop where they for the Santa Fe Railroad. We employed they employed about 1,000 to 1,500 people, and the track ran pretty much through the center of town. The blacks lived in the northeast quadrant, and the whites lived in the rest of the area. They had the freedom to go anywhere they wanted to, pretty much, but they didn't go to school with us. So there was that division. And I think that there was an intimidation factor because there were white authorities. And, if they told a black person what, so to speak, that's what they pretty much did. And really, race didn't play a role, I don't think, in any area of the cover-up, so to speak, unless it was Givens and Bonnie Ray Williams and those guys. Perhaps they may have seen or known more than they felt at liberty to talk about, but I don't know that.
Okay. And what? How do you look at people like Fritz and Elmer Boyd and so forth? Like the detective squad, the robbery and homicide squad was looked at as the elite within the Dallas police as such.
And kind of in Texas as such.
Right. So, I mean, here's my thing. A lot of people pointed the finger to Dallas and its justice and this, that, and the other, but I could probably name up 30 cities where the same would have happened because the structure and the way things are basically being put together. It was the way it was. Okay. Yeah. So that kind of factor.
I don't think there was a better locale than Dallas to do what they did. And that's because of the politics and who was running Dallas in every area of life there, from the mayor, who we learned,
CIA,
that he and his brother were both CIA. It wasn't just Charles Cabell, it was Earl and Charles. And I now know that several of the CIA people who are suspects in that had family living right there in Dallas, Texas. So they could come in and not even check into a hotel. They could stay with family. And I'm talking about Colonel Cale, Rip Robertson, these kind of guys who, Morales, I understand, even had a daughter living in Dallas at the time. And so the machinations were there, perfectly set up, really, I think, for it to happen and for the cover-up to take place.
Right.
If need be.
What's your I'd like to know what do you know about this whole Harlandale Avenue shenanigans and the Cubans, basically? I mean, there's two pictures of Alpha 66 meeting, of which some people think they can see Oswald in the back of that particular photograph. For the size of group that is there, 30, 40 people just having a chat about things like that. The finger always gets pointed to New Orleans and to Miami as such, but Dallas is part of this in I don't know in how, in what shape and so forth, but it's obvious that this is really something that quite a few big people are hanging about in meetings and doing a lot of talking and so forth, What's your take on this whole thing?
Well, Dallas was a real right wing, extreme right wing. You understand? There's a difference between somebody who's right wing and somebody who's left wing, and the extremists on both sides. They're different animals, but Dallas was built by extremists on the right wing. Their whole political structure and life in Dallas was based along those lines. So H.L. Hunt, the Murchisons, these are all big players. There are others with big money that played a role in there. The guy who was running for governor the next year, Jack Creighton, was a wealthy individual who was running things and had office downtown Dallas. So, yeah, these were different people, and the intelligence apparatus there. I think I've read where most intelligence groups, like the 488th in Dallas and so forth, would have 8 or 9 members. In other towns and cities, Dallas had probably 100. So, and most of them probably were either on the sheriff's department or the Dallas police. So it was really a set up place going in, and they had the people with the wherewithal to crush any attempt to learn the real truth
because
if something went wrong.
That's another thing. There's plenty of evidence showing, especially in the research of Vincent Salandria, and especially the guys that hung around there in '64, basically trying to find out. I forget her name, from Oklahoma, Mrs. Shirley Martin, for instance.
Martin.
She was an incredibly brave woman, just tossing 5 kids in a car and just driving down from Oklahoma just to Dallas, Texas, and just interviewing people just there, and then starting to call the FBI.
There was a couple others. Mary Farrell remained behind the scenes for years, and she was working with a guy named Arch Kimbrough. In Dallas, and they were building a chronology, which has become very, very important to researchers, and a very, very difficult task,
incredibly difficult,
tedious task.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question?
Mr. Shaw, this is Gary in Minneapolis, and there's another gentleman with us, John Williams from Washington State. But earlier, prior to you coming on, we had a brief discussion about Marina and some comments that she made. And since you mentioned litigation, we in fact were wondering out loud, why hadn't Marina pursued litigation? And I guess you answered the question now. But further, John and I interviewed Madeline Brown for about 6 hours in 2001. And we transcribed the tape, and we had not heard her say the first time through. This was live in Dallas at her house, and she, we discovered, made the statement that Marina told her that the authorities, not sure what that meant, whether it was Dallas police or CIA or whatever, picked up the Carcano Saturday from the Payne's garage. And then John subsequently reminded me today that he talked to her 6 months before she died and said, did you say that? And is that what actually happened? And Madeline said, that happened exactly the way I said it the first time. In your pursuit of litigation, did that idea ever come up about the gun?
Well, I've got a thick file on what we were going to approach the trial with, or if we could get it into court. And I don't recall what all we were going to do, but I know one of the things was to prove that a lot about the Carcano, or at least bring out the discrepancies in all of the evidence that he used a Carcano up on the 6th floor window. It would have been quite a task, but a very worthwhile one. And to have Marina and the girls, involved in it would have been a real plus. Marina has taken a position now. The last time I talked to her, she's had so many promises and things that she's probably going to be reluctant to do anything like that. But the girls might. And the one thing that if you've ever watched Chauncey Hope when we were interviewing him on camera, he cried because of what the girls and the Oswald family had to live through with this false accusation about being the assassin. And I thought that was very unusual for a tough guy. But I feel that way. They've had to live with a lie all their lives. And I think it's one of these days so hopefully somebody will apologize and to them because of what they did to the family.
Gary.
Sure.
Gary, hi there. I've just got 2 questions, just very quick ones. One, did you ever go to the National Archives and handle any of the physical evidence of the case?
I did a number of times to the archives. I never handled any of the material. I was interested in the documents. Okay. It was at the archives that I found the 2 documents by Vince Drain that I don't know whether y'all know about that or not. Probably you should. There were 2 different documents, same date, same number, same everything, except one says that the paper made that Oswald allegedly made the paper bag with matched, and then another one that said it didn't. So you had conflicting reports by the same agent and the same day, same document number, everything, but in conflict with each other.
Yeah, I spoke to Beale Fraser about 2-3 weeks ago, and I asked him on the ride back to Irvine on November 21, did Oswald have a paper bag, or did he have any materials to construct a paper bag or anything in his hands? And he said no, he didn't. So that would, to me anyway, that would kind of dispel that this myth that he made a bag at the Texas School Book Depository the night before, took it home to get the rifle, etc. Touching on Oswald's daughters, what's their opinion on their father, and do they believe he is innocent?
Say that again.
Rachel and June, what's their opinion on their father, and do they believe he was innocent of the crime?
Oh, they've talked enough to people like myself that they do not believe that their father participated in that. While we're on the paper bag, one of the stupidest things that the FBI came up with, or the authorities came up with, whoever, was the paper bag. Do you know how many fingerprints they found on that thing?
Yeah, just 2, or partial prints, was it?
Yeah. Can you imagine a guy tearing off the paper, carrying it, folding it up, carrying it home, unfolding it, taking and taping it up, and fixing it up, folding it back up, putting it under his arm, putting the gun in it, and carrying it to the Texas School Book Depository, and taking it out, taking the gun out of it, and there'd be only that many fingerprints.
Yeah. And no traces of it ever holding a rifle.
Yeah, no oil.
You know, what's funny to me is there is no photographic evidence that the paper bag was ever on the 6th floor.
That's correct.
In fact, is it Commission Exhibit 1304, where the dotted line is around it? I mean, this is just, you think someone was making it up.
Julie?
Well, they did. They made up a story.
There's a problem with this, because that's now.
Hello there.
Gary, could I ask you a couple of questions?
Sure.
Ian Hughes, yeah. I'm down as user on the thing, but my name's Ian Hughes, yeah. Very pleased to meet you, and this is great information. Thanks for coming on. I just want to ask you a couple of questions. James Files and Judith Ferry Baker, there's been a lot of effort to try and discredit them. What's your opinion on their testimony?
Actually, I don't really have an opinion. When I was working with Joe West back in those days when James Files first came up, and the way he came up is legitimate. An ex-FBI, retired FBI agent, Zach Shelton, actually told West about Files.
Right.
So, I don't know what to make of him, and I wouldn't write him off, nor would I write off Judy.
Right. Yeah, Judith Ferry.
And the reason I say that is because I really haven't had the time or taken the time to delve into either one of them. my area has been different.
Right, I see. Yeah. You said you were involved in the men who killed Kennedy. That's very interesting to me, because Gary Mack was saying that the thing about the Corsican hitmen had no credibility. What do you think about that? The episode about the Corsican hitmen.
There again, I was deeply involved in that. Steve Ravel and I became close friends. I got him on the track, so to speak, of Christian David.
Right.
Because I actually, at that time, I had seen pictures of David and knew of his background, and Michael Victor Mertz. And Bud found out for me that Christian David was in prison in Atlanta. And so I said, that would be a good pursuit, Steve, is to see what you can do and get out of Christian David. And he did. He followed up on him heavily, as you know, and he made a part of the men who killed Kennedy. Whether any of it is actually true, I couldn't speak to, but I think we have to be open to the kind of evidence that was presented, and unless if it doesn't hold water, we throw it away.
Right. Thank you very much. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cheers. Best of luck.
Gary, just one more question for me, please. What do you make of Bill Fraser's recent claims that he's seen a man with a rifle on the knoll?
Day late and a dollar short.
There's your answer.
Yeah, definitely. Have you met Bill Fraser?
Oh yes.
What do you make?
Very nice, and basically he's pretty well stuck with his story through the years, and for him to be writing a book now, he's got to come up with something that is a little bit more than what he's spoken about and spoken to over the years. So
Fraser has got a second set of ghostwriters involved. Do you know who the first set was? Because I know that they weren't very happy with his statements as such, and they were very contradictory. And I think Deborah Conway was also involved one way or another.
I know absolutely nothing about it and about what Buell is doing. So
Thanks,
I know
Gary.
he's been interviewed a lot.
Yeah, that's correct. What's your take on? I don't know if you're familiar with it, the Victoria Adams story of her and Sandra Stiles going down the stairs from the fourth floor rather rapidly, not hearing anyone on those stairs with their high heels clacking down. And Victoria Adams later on admitted that the elevator was running while they were coming down, although she only managed to say it off the cuff, not in any official paperwork.
I believe that... what's the guy that wrote the book about Victoria?
Barry Ernest.
Yeah, Barry Ernest. I believe that's a good book.
It's a very good book.
And I believe that he pretty well nailed it with her. I don't believe anybody ran down the stairs, truthfully.
Well, I think it was too busy to notice Oswald, because not just those two women, but Otis Williams went from the landing of the front steps, went up to the fourth floor to get a better view, and then made his way back down to the ground floor and then back to the second floor. I'm
pretty convinced that Lee Oswald was never on the sixth floor at the time of the shooting.
Yeah.
Now, he may have been up there earlier in the day and, other days of the week, but he wasn't in that sixth floor window.
No, they would have seen him anyway, and he would have been recognized, especially with the color of his shirt. Did you ever speak to Roy Truly?
Never did. Should have, but never did. It's it's funny that it turns out that his wife is a cousin.
Mildred.
You know about that, I guess.
Yeah. Distant relation of for
Flying Tiger guy,
Yeah.
Paulie.
Chenault.
Chenault.
That's right.
Paulie was a part of the Flying Tigers, but Chenault was the one that Miss Truly was into.
I went down and got a fresh one.
He was a general. Yeah, correct. Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, there is actually, Bart. There's a question from Scott Reed.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Gary, see, just going back to the right-wing politics of Dallas back in the early 60s, somebody that I've been researching and writing about that I briefly spoke to you about in Dallas was William Duff, the Scotsman William Duff.
Yes,
And
I'm interested in some extent about him.
A person of interest to me is Juanita Buchanan.
You're really breaking up, Scott.
Yeah,
I don't
try
know
that
what
again, Scott.
No, that's not good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Try it again.
Yeah. Will I just start over again?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're talking about Duff. Right. Now I've lost you completely, Scott.
Frozen again.
Yeah.
Scott, you just frozen
Yeah,
again.
William Duff.
Yeah, go on.
Hello.
Do you want to turn off your video, Scott?
Yeah.
Turn off your video and just use the audio.
Turn off this video, yeah.
Okay.
That's
Can
better.
you hear me okay?
Yeah, hear you fine now, Scott.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a lady called Juanita Buchanan who ran a bar in Dallas called the El Dorado Bar. And she claimed on the night of the Walker shooting to have seen William Duff and Lee Oswald in the bar together. And they left, and William Duff came back after the shooting. And I've never really been able, Gary, to find out a lot about the lady. And I wondered if you knew more about Juanita Buchanan, whether her version of that can be trusted, what kind of person she was, or even if you met her.
I never met her. I tried to, because I was very interested in her story. They moved pretty quickly after the assassination to Florida, and they died probably within a year of each other in Florida. I do not know how. I know they're both dead, and one of them was 54 and one of them was 56, and so I never got to really talk to them about what they saw and heard. But her story is very detailed, pretty well detailed in Mary Farrell's Chronology, I believe. If you've never read that, there was another lady named Sue Fitch, Fitch, in Dallas, who did interview Juanita, and I think it's an important story because of the Andre Angeles portion of that, which is another story altogether.
Yeah. Gary, is there, I mean, I don't want to tread on anybody's toes, but is there any documentation or is there anything that I could liaise with you about in relation to Buchanan and Angeles?
Yeah, again, you're kind of breaking up, but are you talking about the relationship between the Buchanans and?
No, I was just wondering if there's any way that I could correspond with you about those individuals to see if there's anything I can use in any of my research.
I'm sorry, you're really.
I think he wants to compare his research with you. That's what he would like to do.
Oh yeah, I'd be glad to. Somebody needs to write that story because it's interesting. Buchanan worked for the company that first had the Zapruder film there in Dallas. Go figure. Mr. Buchanan, not Juanita. She and it goes on and on. Anjali's real name was Don
Moon.
Help me. Yeah, Don Moon.
Don Moon, yeah.
His daddy was head of the CIO, the labor union.
Right.
Was best friends with Lyndon Johnson. It goes on and on.
Because the story was with Don Moon that he flew into Dallas on the 22nd of November carrying a large sum of cash.
With a bag of money.
Yeah.
Which is not unusual in that time, by the way. That's the way politicians financed their campaigns and their lifestyle. There was no...
They still do.
Well, they still do, but it's a little more difficult now. Back then, that was the only way to do it because, you know, there was absolutely no connection that way. Yeah. Now they can trace money a little easier because of various laws.
Can I ask one other question, Tony, just very quickly?
Yeah, go for it.
If Gary has a view, because the research I've been doing is mainly around Duff and General Walker, and that's how the Buchanan and Andre Angeles all comes into this story. Do you have a view on who shot Walker, or what do you know about that?
Man, again, you're really. I hear about every other word.
The question was about Scott, about the Walker shooting. Do you think who did it? Who did the Walker shooting?
I don't know, but Lee Oswald didn't.
Gary,
yes.
Johnny, did you ever meet Mark Lane?
Yes.
What was he like?
Well, very, very reserved. He's not a mixer, so to speak. The only time that I got to meet him was when they had the critics conference with the House Select Committee back in probably 77. They flew about a dozen of us to Washington to meet around the table with Blakey and his staff. And he was there for one day.
Yeah. What about Harold Weisberg and Sylvia Meagher? Did you meet them?
Who?
Harold Weisberg and Sylvia Meagher?
I got to know Harold pretty well. What a character, but I really liked him, and he was a crusty old man and a fighter, and very opinionated. And if your opinion didn't go his way, he could really tear you up. And if you read some of his letters and so forth, you can discover that. But I liked him.
I spent a year just going through the Weisberg archive, just the whole year, every day. I started browsing through PDFs and reading and all this stuff. And he basically slagged everyone off. He may have had dealings with them for 10 years, but he'd still slag them off afterwards. I mean, because him and Richard E. Sprague were pretty close. And for quite a few years, and investigating Origin 6 and whatnot. And at some point, Sprague went off the rails, as Weisberg would say, and basically, you know, because he went nuts about the so-called dart gun in the umbrella. Mm-hmm. And that was the bit where Weisberg just went, no way, I'm not having this, and just started writing. But he did it with everyone. He did it with Posner. He did it with literally anyone who basically crossed his path. He did it with Harry Livingston. And I've heard the phone calls and so forth, and it's all really cordial and nice, but the letter writing is pure venom and the daggers stabbing in the back just continuously.
But if I could call him right now, he would be a jewel to, you know, to talk with me and would answer any question that I might have. I found him, like I say, a crusty old man, but he believed his way or the highway. Yeah. That's for sure.
What about Sylvia Meagher? Did you meet her?
Who?
Did you meet Sylvia?
Yes, at the same critics conference. I had communicated with her during the writings, but I only got to meet her at the critics conference when she was
There are two transcripts of this critics conference. Actually, I read them about 2-3 months ago. I went through them, and they are actually at Mary Farrell's website, because I was going to scan them in, and then I started looking around, and there are two.
Why is there two? Why is there two? Are they the same?
Sorry.
Are the two transcripts the same?
No, it's morning and afternoon. It's morning and afternoon.
Well, we were there 2 days.
Right. Well, then it's one day and the other one's the other day. But it's they are like part A and part B, and they're each 100 to 120, maybe 150 pages long. Mm-hmm. They are at Mary Farrell, because I ran the riff numbers and found out about it in the end, that they were online as such. But yeah, I remember them.
I had met Tink Thompson previously, but he was there at that conference, and gosh, I can't remember all who were there. If you call their name, I can tell you whether they were there.
Well, I know that Mary Farrell was there. I know that.
Mary was there. Yes,
you were there, and
Larry Harris.
I think Salandria may have been there as well, if I'm not mistaken.
No, Salandria wasn't there, but Harris was. Larry Harris was there.
Was Ray Marcus there?
Who?
Ray Marcus?
No.
Right. Okay.
We've got another couple of questions and a few people with their hands up. I mean, I want to start with, and I will come to Richard and Ryan and Gary. But I've got a question from David, which I want to just put to you, Gary. It's about, he's asking, can you vouch for Beverly Oliver's credibility, particularly regarding her film and it being taken by the FBI SA Regis Kennedy?
I can vouch for her credibility without hesitation. The only thing is there's a misunderstanding. She never said that was Regis Kennedy. I took what I called my mug book at the time, which was a thick photographic book of people involved in the case in some manner or some form. I let her go through it page by page. And when she got to Regis Kennedy's, she said, that's the man right there. None of them were labeled. She had no idea. I only told her later and wrote in the story that she identified the photograph of Regis Kennedy. So whether it was Regis Kennedy, I don't have a clue, but it was a man who looked like him.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I'm going to go to Richard. You got your hand up, and then I'm going to come to Ryan and Gary. So go ahead, Richard.
Hi, Gary. Thanks very much for
hi,
joining
Richard. I've enjoyed it. You guys are doing a great job. I appreciate you.
I just wanted to ask you, going back to what you said at the beginning of the discussion this afternoon, when your antennae first began to twitch after the assassination, did you find amongst your own circle of family and friends, were you very much a lone voice? Did anyone after Ruby acted on the Sunday morning, did anyone begin to openly voice the doubts as to the official line that was being peddled?
Just about everyone. Just about everyone. Everyone suspicioned at that time that Oswald was shut up. You know, they killed him because they didn't want him to talk. That was everybody's opinion that I ran into. Now, nobody pursued that except me and my family, but that was the thought.
Yeah, good. Interesting. Thanks.
Sorry, if you can bear with me, Ryan, I want to bring in Neil Safferty, because he's got a question. He's asked me for it a little while longer. Then I'm going to come to you next. Thanks, Ryan. Neil, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Hi,
Neil.
I actually met you very briefly at Mansfield at Chris Gallup's thing a couple of years ago, so it's good to talk again. Roscoe White, you touched on that briefly. 30 years on, how do you reflect on that now, and what do you think about his potential involvement?
If you could see what I've seen and hold in your hand what I've held in my hand, you would believe the story. Absolutely. You know, it's one of the strangest things I was ever involved with. In fact, Nigel Turner put together another Men Who Killed Kennedy, the whole program. was about that. And it was amazing what he was able to find out. I'm going to write about it. Actually, I've got a guy that's going to write about it that I'm helping, because it needs to be known. You know, if you'd have held in your hands those cables, there would have been no doubt in your mind. If you'd held in your hands and gone through the so-called witness elimination book, there would be no doubt in your mind. If you could hear all that Geneva, Ricky White's mother, told about her conversations and overheard conversations with Jack Ruby, about Jack Ruby, when she worked for him and when her and Roscoe were there with him. One of these days, that story will resurface and be important.
Do you think he went? Do you think he went on to Oak Cliff afterwards? Was he involved in the Tippett issue?
That's what he wrote in the diary that was taken from. I will tell you this: when Ricky White was taken to the FBI office in Midland by the, I believe the guy was the district attorney, who Ricky first went to with the stuff, including the diary that disappeared. For days afterward, they surveilled, FBI, I've got the documents where they surveilled, they followed both Tricia and Ricky wherever they went, and really were watching their every move after Ricky told the story, what he had found, and so forth. So the FBI was very, very interested in what Ricky White had and what he was telling.
That's interesting. Did you also, second question, if you don't mind, did you ever get a chance to interview Adrian Hamby, the teenager that ran into the library on Jefferson?
No, I would like to interview him, because I think what he has to say is important.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think there's a possibility that whole thing might have been a diversion away from the Abundant Life Temple. And that kid was only 16. Is he still alive? Do we know if he's still alive?
I don't know. I could look it up, but I've not done so. I'm interested in the men in suits who.
Yeah, the Secret Service or FBI that was supposed to be at the library. Yeah.
And I'm interested in their statement, wrong man. When they got to it, found the guy, they said it's wrong man. The only way you know it's the wrong man is because you know who the right man is.
Absolutely. And just one final thing, I don't want to be too greedy. Do you have any papers from Larry Harris? Do you have any copies of any of his work at all? Because I've been trying to search for a couple of specific articles that he wrote, one in '93 for a Dateline Dallas special edition, and one for an Australian publication in '94, both on the Tippett murder. I'm just wondering if you could help me find them, or if you do have them.
I would just have to look. I've got a file on Larry Harris. I've got a file on everybody. I got your name now. I'll start one on you.
That'll be a big one.
I knew I should have just been audio only.
Yeah, now we stick a picture next on the top, mate.
There you go.
I'm dead.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Ryan next, but as obviously ask you if Emmett has any questions, we're happy to take those as well.
And Emmett has since left the room and has gone with his mother. Hello, Gary. It's nice to see you.
Good to see you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been fortunate enough to talk with you several times, meeting you through Chris. And anyways, I always am fascinated to hear you talk. I was just messaging back and forth with Neil about that. I think you bring such a great history to bear to this case, and just the work that you've done is incredible. So thank you as always.
I hate that I'm now the grandpappy and all.
Fair enough. Well, we appreciate you joining us. Trust me.
very much.
The main question, I've had a chance to ask you a lot of questions over the years, but the main question, I've got two questions for you. The first is, you touched a little earlier and talked a little bit about the Assassination Information Center that I think used to be on Munger in Dallas, the one that was founded in the late 80s. Is that at all related to what Jim Lazar has done with the AARC in terms of physical? Okay, so those are two completely separate entities.
Completely separate.
Okay, so a lot of the material and things that you had that were part of the information center, I would assume just either stayed in your possession or perhaps with one of the stakeholders that was involved in funding or founding it, like you mentioned Bud Fensterwald and some other folks that were.
Well, when it was taken over by Cutler, you know, he became the owner, so to speak, or half owner with Larry Howard. From the time Larry Howard and Cutler passed on, I don't know where the materials went.
Okay.
Okay, so they may be partly with Larry Howard's wife. They may be partly with a guy named Tom Bowden, who ran it for Cutler when Cutler kind of became the financial angel. I'm unsure.
Okay. Well, thank you. Second question I have is rather a loaded one, so please feel free to elaborate or not as much as you'd like on the following topic.
Shoot back. I shoot back.
So Neil and I are working on something separate, but we've become, he's got me interested in some characters associated with the DPD that were involved at all three big scenes that day, in Texas Theater, Book Depository, and the Tippit murder scene. So specifically, I'm just kind of asking for, I guess, a qualitative assessment on a couple of people from yourself, and that would be Westbrook, Nick McDonald, Jerry Hill, kind of some of the characters that we're all very familiar with and are very infamous DPD officers, and kind of what your just overall thoughts on those people are, whether or not, I'm sure at some point in the past you'd spoken to all those characters or at least a handful of them. Can you share with us any qualitative thoughts you have on some of those guys?
Well, I don't trust what they say, especially about this case. I met who else did you say? Westbrook, I never met. McDonald, okay. I never met. Who was Jerry the third? Hill. Jerry Hill. I met one time. Larry Harris did do a short interview with him, and he scared him to death, he said. You know, I got really well acquainted with Patrick Dean.
Okay.
And in fact, I rode around with him some in Dallas, and we talked a lot. He never let a bombshell out. In fact, the last time I talked to him before he died, Penn and I went to his home in East Texas, and he had retired because of his health. He had cancer, and his wife kept asking him to tell him what she wanted him to tell us. I don't know, but she kept pressing him to go ahead and tell these guys. He never did, and whatever he had, he died with, I guess. He showed me Jack Ruby's glasses, which Jack Ruby had given to him, and he had Jack Ruby's hat that he had given to him. He was close to Jack Ruby because he was in and out of this club on duty numerous times.
Interesting.
Can I just interject? Who wasn't close with Jack Ruby? I mean, I'm sorry to say, but is there anyone? I mean, the DPD does its best to distance themselves from Ruby and so forth. Yeah, well, you know, met him, blah, blah, blah. Knew him around. He brought some coffee and donuts. Hell no, he knew everything. He knew every office, every door of that building, and he knew everyone who was behind it as such. He knew what door to knock on to get help of some sort. He knew exactly where to go. That's
the reason he was in Dallas was to do that. He got to know all of them and ingratiated himself with them, and got by with a lot more than you and I know because of it.
Yeah.
But that's what criminals do.
Gary, I've always thought that Jack Ruby didn't actually want to kill Oswald, because didn't Ruby phone on Saturday night and say, I meant who the guy was, but didn't he say something along the lines of, if you transfer him in that way, we are going to kill him? I can't remember.
I think you're probably right. He would like to have gotten out of it, but he had his orders and he had to carry them out. And he was actually tracking Oswald for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and with pistol in hand. He had a pistol in his pocket on Saturday night and Friday night when he was at the Dallas Police Department. He was ready anytime. What a lot of people miss is that he got a strange, and I think it was a coded letter from AGVA saying, do not send the letter today. It would not be well received in Chicago, or something of that nature, which tells me that right at the last minute, they were trying to get a hold of him to pull off killing Oswald for whatever reason. But he didn't get the letter, so he carried out his duty.
What do you think would have happened if Ruby tried to kill Oswald and failed? Do you think Oswald would have been put in some sort of protective custody or anything like that?
Well, I'm sure they would try to do that, but they were never, ever, when it turned out this way, they were never, ever going to let Oswald talk publicly or go to trial. Whatever it took, they'd take care of it.
Did you ever speak to Marguerite Oswald?
Yes, I did.
What was she like, and do you know why she lies in an unmarked grave next to Oswald at Rose Hill?
No, I don't. She was a peculiar lady, as we would say down here. Peculiar in her demeanor, her talk, and so forth. I didn't get to know her well, but I was in her home, and she knew that her son, in her opinion, was innocent, but also she believed he was an agent. Did you know she made a phone call to President Kennedy and talked to President Kennedy in 1961?
No, I never. What was
Never
that?
heard that? Never heard that. Yeah. Yeah.
And what was said?
Well, I don't recall what the authorities said was talked about, but you know, you can speculate anything you want to. But the logbook of his telephone calls at the White House has her listed.
Wow, I never knew that.
Wasn't she phoning to try and get Lee out of the Soviet Union?
She could have been. It could have been a legitimate phone call, but just the fact that she did call and talk with the president, is, kind of peculiar. Not everybody gets to do that.
Okay, I'm going to bring Gary Severson in now. Gary, thanks for your patience. You've had a hand up for a little while. Do you want to just come in? Unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Go for it, Gary.
Mr. Shaw.
Hi, Gary.
Earlier, just like my other question referred to an earlier discussion this morning, I was trying to come up with somebody that was here in Minneapolis until they passed away a few years ago. It was Bradley Earl Ayers, Ayers. The War That Never Was his book's title.
Real familiar with him, yes.
Okay. And it became, in 1976, it became the Zenith Secret. A CIA insider exposed a secret war against Cuba and the plot that killed the Kennedy brothers. Do you have an impression of what he was about? Is he legit?
He came to see us at the center before the movie was being filmed there in Dallas. When he came on the scene, he said he was being followed and had to lose a tail. He spoke with us quite a long time. No important information that I recall. I'd have to look at the file to see what he said. But when he left, he called within 30 minutes and said he had been tailed again. And, I thought he was paranoid. I met with him another time or two. And he did some work on our behalf with David Morales. We were already looking at that time at David Morales real strongly as being a suspect in the assassination. And we couldn't find him. And he was able to trace him over to Arizona, and he was already dead and buried, so forth. But he said he was knocked in the head and his briefcase taken away from him at that time by persons unknown. And, I don't know what all was true, what all he was not. I know that when he finally wrote in the second edition, and I think you called it Zenith,
right?
What he told about me and Finsterwald and Bob Dorff from California, and the center was totally false. In fact, I wrote a review of the book for Amazon. You can go in there and read it. That what he said about us was absolutely untrue, and I kind of dismissed him from that time.
Yeah, I had a couple, 2-3 interactions with him, and it kind of fits your description too. A lot of paranoia. I met with. I was at his compound outside Minneapolis. I call it a compound because it was heavily guarded, as if he was paranoid. And
being paranoid doesn't mean you don't have real enemies.
Right. And so within a few days, he died. When I got to him, he had just gotten out of the hospital, as I told the group earlier this morning. So I'll leave it at that. That gives me some perspective. What about?
I wouldn't discount his information about JM Wave and the activities that he was personally involved in. Not everything he told was false, but what he really got mad at us for whatever reason, I don't know, and wrote a very stinging section of his book was about the center and myself and others.
Oh, I'll have to take a look at that.
Yeah.
Do you have any?
Read my rebuttal of it.
Okay. Did he have? Switching topics? Just one more question. Did Billy Sol Estes have any redeeming qualities?
I got to know him real well. In fact, he wrote in the book that he gave me, that his daughter, I guess, wrote, what a great friend I was and all of that stuff. We were never friends, but somebody will read that one of these days and think we were, perhaps. He had redeeming qualities. Not everything he told was false. The things that he would lie about is the criminal activities that he was involved in. When he talked about Johnson and his association and dealings with Johnson, we were right on from what I could find out. So don't discount him completely.
That was funny. I caught him driving down the freeway outside of Dallas, and I was calling from up here in Minnesota. And I was surprised that he even answered his car phone. And I said, "So is this how you describe the triangulation in Dealey Plaza?" So I did the standard spiel. He said, "Yep, that's exactly the way it happened." I mean, it was like I could have told him there were people in a building 5 blocks away that had super shooting skills, and he might have agreed to just about anything you'd come up with. It just seemed like he was really a con.
Maybe at that stage of his life, maybe he was, and maybe he envisioned himself being a lot more acquainted with the activities that were going on at that time.
Sure.
No, I couldn't speak for his veracity on anything other than you know, what can be confirmed, basically.
Right, right. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you know about the Criminal Intelligence Division paying special attention and care to the workers of the Texas School Book Depository after the assassination? So I'm talking December, January, February of '64, even March, until they're actually talked to by people of the Warren Commission in Dallas as such. I mean, I can tell you what I know. I mean, I know that Victoria Adams was visited on February 17th of '64, where she was interviewed by Jim Lavelle. And Lavelle used the excuse of having to interview her again as that they had a fire and that her file was burned as such. And they basically re-interviewed her. And this is also where the so-called encounter with Bill Shelley and Billy Lovelady, which never happened, was all of a sudden basically being pushed into the narrative as such. But there are also other people like Ruth Dean, who, according to the list that they kept of the people inside the Texas School Book Depository, we call it the so-called Revel list, which is a 2-pager of people whose names were taken down, and it's Oswald's name with his Elspeth address, who's number 1 in that whole list. And there are markings behind Ruth Dean and somebody else. I can't really remember who that was. And it's also known that there are several people that have been watched. Also, they had a guard at the door after it happened and so forth. There are all these indicators. But what do you actually know about these things that they were actually closely watched as such by the Criminal Intelligence Division?
I can't speak to that, Bart. That's not something that I've particularly followed or looked into. I would suspicion that these same guys were probably associated with the military intelligence group there in Dallas, and or with perhaps the FBI or CIA. They all were connected to outside of their realm of activity as an employee. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Wish I could help you more, but I can't. Go ahead.
Gary, do you know if Robert Kennedy ever visited Dealey Plaza?
I'm unaware of him ever coming to Dallas, much less Dealey Plaza.
Do you know if he ever conducted his own private investigation into the case itself?
No. I would suspect that he had intelligence, people who were knowledgeable of certain aspects of it that had spoken to him. And he knew, I think, well, I know he knew that his brother was not killed by Lee Oswald, that it was a coup. I have no doubt about that now.
Do you think if he had won the presidency, do you think he would have reopened the investigation?
I think he would have tried, but he had probably got the same reception as his brother.
Yeah. Do you think he would have been a good president?
And did.
Yeah, he did. Do you think he would have been a good president?
I think John Kennedy would have been a good president. I'm not sure about Robert. You know, we really never got to experience John Kennedy. And, you know, he had just that few years. If he had got another 4 years, perhaps we'd be different today. I don't know.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary.
Can I just ask you about the future? So we've got the Project JFK trio working hard on digitizing your material as such. You obviously have a big collection. I know about big collections because I've been going through one myself. Many times where I wanted to put the end of a shotgun into my mouth, and because it's just unbelievable how much of this stuff entails. And you know, most researchers have said, like, well, I'm just going to investigate the Secret Service, or I'm just going to investigate the medical part. But Malcolm just did everything that is basically you can get your hands on. What is the scope for your job the job that it entails? Like, how much is actually involved, and is there a deadline as to when it's all going to be available as such, and so forth? What's in the pipeline?
Well, it's hard to say. I probably have every book about the assassination. I don't know of one that I don't have. And I've got 4 sets of stacking bookcases in there with all of that material, plus a lot of duplicates, plus a library on the FBI, the CIA, the Bay of Pigs. You know, I've got a huge library because I've tried to buy just about everything that pertains to that period of time. My files in here, 1, 2, there's 4, 8, 9, 10, 11, about a dozen legal size file folders completely packed with files. And I don't know how many plastic file containers I've got, but probably a dozen of those. It just goes on and on. But, you know, I've been doing this since day one, basically. And so my collection is huge. My real fear is that one day somebody will look in here and say, look here, why didn't he follow up on this? Or, you know, why didn't he tell somebody about this?
I've got that. I've got that with Malcolm's collection. I found a few things where I just went, what? This is incredibly important. He goes, I didn't even know I had it. And I was like, oh my God, it's vital, it's gold. So he'd hear me scream out inside the archive, go, gold. And he goes, what? And I'm just like, this document, it's amazing, blah, blah, blah. And he just went, I just scanned it. I just had Xeroxed it in as part of a 200-page collection of photocopies. And, you know, you can't look through every document. I mean, I've got the same thing.
And so I plead guilty. I didn't follow up on some that I did. I kicked myself for not interviewing some people that I could have interviewed. Wally Weston, for instance. Right. You know, we didn't have this web. You know, we didn't have all the tools that you guys have. Mm-hmm. And so I want to make them available to you guys eventually, as best I can. You know, so that, you know, Penn Jones, one of the first things that he told me was that Gary will not be able to solve this, but we can nail some stakes in the ground for future historians to follow up on, and maybe they can. And that's my hope. I think we know, at least I feel in my own mind, that I know who was behind the murder. I think I'm beginning to get more familiar with the individuals who probably pulled the trigger in Dealey Plaza. But it's still a long way to go, and hopefully one of these days, you younger guys can can find the stakes and pull them up and see what's there. And that's about all I can tell you.
Yeah. I'm just going to have there's one more question from David here, Gary, if I can just read it out to you. He's asking about the criminal intelligence and military intelligence FBI links in Dallas, and do they extend to the right-wing affiliations, such as the John Birch Society, the KKK, and things like that?
Yes. This is just a simple answer. They were all connected to right-wing organizations of some type and some kind. And, you know, that was the mentality. And you didn't get to be a cop unless you had that mentality.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else?
Yeah, Gary. Another question. Did you ever look at Tosh Plumley and his story of the he claims he was on the south knoll, not the north knoll.
I don't discount. It's funny. I got a call one day from Bud Fensterwald in Washington. I'm in Cleburne, and he says, "Meet me in Denver, Colorado. We got a guy we need to talk to." And so I got on a plane and flew up and met Bud. We met Tosh Plumlee and his wife, and he told us some stories. I believe he was actively involved in the things in Cuba and in Miami and Florida and the Cuban operations and all that, like he says. I have a thick set of files that we got in Freedom of Information on Tosh, and the Roselli connection is in those files. And I have never bought into a shot from the South node. And so I that's all I can say about what Tosh says he was doing. That would not be a good place to try to kill the president. You'd be shooting between a Secret Service agent, Nellie Connolly, and Jacqueline Kennedy in order to hit the president. And, the places they fired from were, I believe, already been pinpointed, and that's the Knoll and everything all the way around to the criminal courts building, because he was clean. A clean shot could be obtained at the president from those locations.
Do you believe the hole in the windshield?
I believe the hole in the windshield, yeah.
Yeah.
Because 2 witnesses saw it. One of them says he put a pencil through it.
Yeah. Yeah, 2 or 3 witnesses, yeah.
Can I bring in Joseph Bax at this point? Joseph, you have a question?
Hi, Gary.
Hey, Joe. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I first met you in 1991 at the ASK conference, and you haven't aged a day, my friend.
You're very, very kind.
Could you talk a little bit about the Dallas Citizen Council, and if you have any research on them, and if possible, like a list of who was in the Dallas Citizens Council in 1963?
I have a list somewhere of who was in it, and it was the players of Dallas.
Right.
These were the people, the movers and the shakers, and so you didn't get in that council unless you were somebody. How much they had to do with anything pertaining to the assassination, I don't think they as a group would even touch something like that, but individuals in that group would. And it would be a group like this that would determine whether the school book depository should be torn down, which was their idea, which was what most people in Dallas thought should happen. Most of the movers and shakers wanted to tear the whole thing down. Others didn't, and so they won out. But a very powerful group at one time, very powerful.
Yeah,
they used to be, by the way, they used to be called the White Citizens Council.
Oh, really? That was the name before the Dallas Citizens Council? Yeah, I was interested in them from Texas trip planning research. So anything I can get on them would be great.
Thanks. Good to see you again.
This is sorry. There's another question from David, Gary, if it's okay. Do you reject Sherry Feister's work, arguing that there was only one headshot from the South Knoll?
Yes, I'm in conflict with that.
Okay.
And let me tell you why. She did not have the car to do a blood splatter test. She had only the Zapruder film, and perhaps she could use Nix and much more or something like that. But if you don't have the car and can trace the blood elements and so forth, you can't make a stipulation like that. I definitely believe that there were 2 simultaneous, almost, gunshot wounds to the head. And nothing against her at all, because she's a sweet lady. But, I don't agree with her findings.
Gary, did you ever interview Darrell C. Tomlinson or O.P. Wright?
No, I never did. Like I say, man, there are so many that I would love to have interviewed. Wally Weston lived until 70 or 80s, before he died, and he wasn't 75 miles from me, but I didn't know it.
What about S.M. Holland?
No, because he pretty well was interviewed by Mark.
Yeah, I heard that he walked around with 2 bodyguards at one point.
Well, he may have, you know, he may have.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Gary, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for giving us so much of your time.
Thanks very much. It's great to be with you guys, and y'all keep up the work, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. Lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
If I can figure out how to turn it off, man. Y'all get off my screen.